We broke down the news for everybody yesterday about the Supreme Court decision. The TLDR is that the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 unanimously that Colorado wrongly took Donald Trump off of the ballot by claiming that he had violated the 14th Amendment. The split decision was 5-4, where the majority, the slim majority of the court, ruled that in the future, any process that would lead to the removal of a candidate from a ballot must come from specifically congressional action, as in they had to pass a law as they lay out in the 14th Amendment that lays out the exact candidate, the qualifications, the types, and the rules as to which would govern it. And that currently does not exist as we understand it. So this kind of punched the ball to Congress. The dissent came from all of the liberal justices, where the 3 justices said that they should have narrowly considered the Colorado question and not set a new standard. And then Amy Coney Barrett, as I understand it, didn't join the liberal dissent, but didn't join the majority opinion either.
So
I don't really know what's going on.
It was, her thing was weird. Right. I don't understand it. But it was basically like, she actually agreed with the liberals that the decision
went too
far. But then her whole thing was like, but what we really should talk about is how we came to a unanimous decision. Whatever. That's what's really important. I was like, what? It was weird.
You can tell she's a mom of 7, because that's like a very mom of 7.
It was a very mom move. That's so true. Yeah. Like, we all came together. Let's just focus on the positive here, guys.
Well,
like,
thanks,
okay.
Mom. Usually not the right answer. Anyway, so immediately, though, that sparked panic and responses here in Washington. The most noteworthy was one by Congressman Jamie Raskin, who said he will immediately join with several others to introduce legislation in the House of Representatives to bar Donald Trump from the ballot. Let's take a listen.
I am working with a number of my colleagues, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Eric Swalwell, to revive legislation that we had to set up a process by which we could determine that someone who committed insurrection is disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And the House of Representatives already impeached Donald Trump for participating in insurrection by inciting it. So the House has already pronounced upon that.
Interesting. So Jamie Raskin has introducing the bill here. Obviously, he says that he's joining with, Eric Swalwell and a few others to increase this. Now, this may be a hot take that people wouldn't expect this, but you know what? It's through the normal legislative channels. I mean, first of all, it doesn't have a chance in hell, so it doesn't really matter. But hey, it's keeping with the procedure that was laid out by the Supreme Court, so I say go for it.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of conservatives like freaking out over that. Can you believe this? But it's like, they're just literally doing what the Supreme Court told them to do. So I didn't see why there was such a thing about this particular. As you said, I mean, listen, we should see this basically as a messaging bill. There's no they don't have control of the House. They don't have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. So this is not going anywhere anytime soon. But it was directly responsive to the,
I saw it. I said, hey, thank you, Jamie Raskin. You know why? You're following what the court told you to do. Go for it. That's the democratic process. You can introduce it in the House. You guys can debate it. They can bring it to the floor if you want. You can send it over to the Senate. Krystal, am I wrong?
I'm sure Mike Johnson will get right on that.
Krystal, am I wrong that you need 2/3 as ascribed by the amendment? That's the only thing I'm confused by.
No, because, well, I mean, this gets into the ruling itself, which, in my opinion, was kind of bullshit, especially this aspect of it.
Okay.
Because, so they based this, this reading that, this has to go through Congress and that's the process. They based it on the last line in the amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, where it says, Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each House, remove such a disability. The amendment doesn't say anything about Congress being the body that has to affirm the disability. They just made that up because, I mean, that's how the court system works. It's not surprising to me. It was exactly what I thought that they would do because they're cowards and they didn't want to be the ones responsible for upending the election, whatever. And they also wanted to sort of just settle this question and push it off. And so they've made it so that even in a scenario where someone, Donald Trump or someone else, was actually found guilty of insurrection through a jury of their peers through the criminal justice system, that doesn't count so long as they have enough of a political majority to block this sort of legislation. So no, 2/3 isn't prescribed. 2/3 only has to do with removing the ban. There's literally nothing in the amendment about affirming the ban, which is, part of why this went through the court system.
I'm not a legal scholar. I'm not a Federal Society any person, so I can only speak to the politics, but I support this decision 100%. And I'll tell you why, which is that was my laptop charger. Sorry.
Okay.
I will say they've
drop.
resolved the question for all time. And I'm happy about that because enough of this nonsense. Like, we can't have competing decision of insurrection and what is it and is it not? I mean, it's a genuine democratic question, as happened after the Civil War. If you go back to our original debate on the subject, after the Civil War, if you serve for the Confederate States of America, you cannot serve in government unless you are removed by the, unless that disability is removed, as it was in 1876, according to the history I have here in front of me, that you can no longer serve. Great. It's simple. Did you serve in the Confederate States Army? Did you fight and take up rebellion against the government? Here, I mean, it's not really clear. You know, we don't have a real congressional legal standard. So what is an insurrection? What is it? Is it a riot? Is it an insurrection? Is it a coup d'etat? They're trying to overthrow the government. These are like genuine democratic questions that need to be resolved through the democratic process, either by voting or through Congress. Now, is Congress, broken and inefficient? Yeah, but it was in 1872 too. It has been for 200 some years. So for me, I'm happy because I'm sick of all of this like fake interpretation of the 14th Amendment or whatever. Nobody knows. It's like none of us are lawyers or others. The court, I think correctly, kicked it to Congress and said, you guys figure it out. What is insurrection? What's not insurrection? And if you can't figure it out, then we're going to err on the side of democracy, which is what it is. I mean, come on, these courts, what some freaking DC appellate court is going to set the standard for president of the United States? That's nuts. That's just as nuts as the Texas Fifth, what's it called? The Fifth Circuit that made that crazy ruling. What am I thinking about? The abortion pill, mifepristone, something like that. So whatever. All right, people can look it up. The Texas abortion judge who can just say, oh, this one abortion pill is outlawed. That's bullshit. You can't have national policy that's like that. So anyway, for me, you can't allow the legal system to weigh in on such a highly important democratic question of who can run for president of the United States.
I will remind you that states have the power, and that was affirmed in this decision, to decide who's eligible for the ballot based on all of the other constitutional requirements. So I don't really see how this is different. But I mean, listen, like I said, this is not a legal decision. It's a political decision. It's a political decision.
Yeah, and I support the
because the decision of like, oh, we're going to come up with this process. They try to ground it because they have their, bullshit originalist like cloak that they put on whenever it's convenient for them, and then they immediately take it off when it's not convenient for them. So they try to ground it in this last line of the amendment, which says nothing. The amendment says nothing about the process by which you determine whether someone engaged in insurrection or not. They don't say that. They just talk about, okay, well, if someone is found to have engaged in insurrection, is removed from the ballot, here's how you can override that through 2/3 vote in Congress. So they try to use that to say, oh, well, that must mean that they meant that Congress is in charge of the whole thing. Well, it doesn't say that. So, I mean, it's completely invented. Let's just be clear about that. This is the way they wanted to resolve it. They wanted to resolve the question. They did not want to have, the idea of someone being kicked off the ballot and like really resting on them. And I'm talking about the conservatives and the liberals now at this point. They didn't want that in their hands. They're fundamentally basically cowards. They always look for like the least sort of bombshell thing they can do outside of the abortion decision, but that was a long time coming and sort of a different deal, et cetera, et cetera. And so they invented this process that isn't actually grounded either in the history or the text or the way that this thing has been used before. They invented it. So listen, like I said, am I surprised? No, because I think almost all of their decisions are basically political in their interests, based on their ideology or based on their desire to preserve the legitimacy of the court, et cetera. So they invented this process, and it is now what it is.
I will grant you that there is no basis for this, okay? There's no history
okay.
and within
Thank
the text. No, for real. I am not an originalist. I am not a textualist. Any of this? Like all this other legal. Frankly, when my friends who are lawyers talk like this, my eyes completely glaze over. I can only speak to the political question. I think it was a good political decision. Obviously, there was 9-0 enough that
I just don't see why going through Congress, which is obviously, that's the definition of a political body, why that's superior to going through to saying, okay, it has to go through the court system and someone has to be found guilty of insurrection by a jury of their peers. That's a piece where I'm like, I don't see why they settled on this versus, some other standard. Again, they just sort of invented it because at bottom, because they know this will never happen. They know that there's no chance that this Congress is going to come anywhere close to, deeming that Donald Trump or anyone else for that matter engaged in an insurrection. So they can kill the idea that this is relevant, even though if you read the plain text of this, if it applies to anyone, it applies to Donald J. Trump. They can avoid having to actually make a decision on whether he engaged in insurrection. They can kick the can to another body, but they can also effectively kill, the possibility that this is relevant at all, but with their hands staying clean. That's why they did it.
This is where I'm apart, because I don't see the clear insurrection or any of that in there at all. I think that the amendment was written for a very specific purpose, to bar people who were genuine traitors who took up arms against their country in the United States Civil War, and then to make sure that they couldn't serve in government and recreate the Jim Crow South. Oops, it happened anyways. But the point is that that was the point by the radical Congress that passed the 14th Amendment. I think we should stay within that. I think the bar should literally be that high. To ban you from office, I think you should basically have taken up arms against your country, fought and killed your own countrymen, sold them out, and literally fought for a rival army, as these gentlemen did against the Confederates. Other than that, it's up to the people, and you guys get to decide. That's just my bar for the ballot.
It doesn't say treason. It doesn't even say, it says you can have engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. I mean, listen, he tried to overturn a democratic election. He, all of the election maneuvering behind the scenes. There's a reason why even Trump's lawyers didn't try to make the case that he didn't engage in insurrection and had nothing to do with any of it. So in addition, yes, that was the context that this was originally put into place, but it is not the only context in which it has been used. So I don't accept that this is just like, some dead piece of the Constitution has no relevance going forward post-Civil War. I don't think that makes any logical sense.
I don't think it's dead. I think if people want to figure out what rises to the barrier of the U.S. Civil War, you are welcome to pass a law through Congress in which we will all commonly understand as a united people was an act of such terrible, taking up arms against our government that we will bar you. Otherwise, leave it to the people and they can decide. If enough people agree with you on January 6th, as some did on 2022, don't vote for Trump. Be my guest. It's a free country. I mean, that's really what it comes down to in this particular instance. And again, this is why the history of it matters. I think you're engaging in a bit of textualism. Is the reason that they had to pass this is that the South was unreconstructed and they would have reelected genuine traitors to basically, they would have reelected genuine traitors and unreconstructed Southerners to represent them in the Congress and then to use their senatorial and congressional ability to block rights for freed slaves in the South. That was the actual intent of this entire thing. So that's, again, where we have to kind of raise the bar to for what we assume, where we should come to the point where no government or all governments as representative should do their absolute best to not stand in the way of democracy and allow it to ultimately flourish for the people. And I don't think that anything Trump has done has ever risen to the level of literally taking up arms against your own country.
But nowhere in here does it say that it has to.
Well,
nor does it say, like, the bar is the Civil War and anything below that doesn't count. It doesn't say any of that. I mean,
I agree,
they're very intentional about the way that they wrote and conceived of, these various parts of the Constitution. So, I am very reluctant to put limits on who can run for office. This is why I oppose term limits. Like, I think if people want to elect some deadbeat congressman for 35 terms and who's, getting wheeled in a wheelchair, like, I think that we should have democratic mechanisms so people have better understanding of what that means. I think we should have money on a politics so there's not such an incumbency advantage of just like corporations flooding their campaign coffers so they're there forever. But I support the right of the people to vote for that friggin' 110-year-old who's like slobbering on themselves if that's what they want, okay? Unpopular opinion, but that's how I feel. I don't think we should have age limits in the Constitution, either at the higher end or at the lower end. I believe fundamentally in that democratic process. To me, this is an exception because I do think that the country has an interest in banning from office people who actively seek to undermine the basic tenets of that country. And I think that's what Donald Trump did. So again, listen, I'm not surprised by the decision. I do think that the legal questions involved were very complex. But, part of why they crafted the decision the way that they did, they kicked it to a body that they know is going to be unable to act, is because if you read this on its face, a lot of people are going to feel this applies to Donald Trump. They didn't want to deal with that messiness, so they effectively punted, and that's where we are. It's a political decision. They made up the criteria here, And that's the reality.
But that's the problem. You could use that against anything, a political understanding. You could say that any Democrat who didn't vote to certify the election in 2016 engaged in the same sort of behavior. And I would not oppose that. I want those people to run. I want the bar to be so incredibly high. If you believe that Trump is bad, then vote against him. You know, it's your right as a citizen. I got to disagree on the age limits, though, because it's in the Constitution in terms of how young you got to be. So at that point,
people who
we got
did
to
January 6th, it's fine to run for office, but if you're like, 24 or whatever, and people want to vote for you, that's not okay.
Well, no, I don't think it's okay. I think it's in the Constitution. And so clearly the framers or whatever, we got to stick with a little bit.
Okay, but we're talking about what should be.
Oh, yeah, no, I would have put it on philosophical grounds, I wouldn't support it. Yeah, I would not. That said, now given where we are with age, it's a little bit more complicated, especially with a captured political system where we are right now in terms of mental faculties. I mean, this gets to like all basic fundamental questions like driver's licenses. Should people who are over 80 be allowed to drive? Honestly, I think the answer should be no. Or you should.
I think it depends on capability.
I've seen too many of these. I've seen too many of these folks.
A lot of sharp 80-year-olds out there. All right.
Listen, I think they should, well, at the very least, they should be subjected to a very, very strenuous test, and we as a people should be like actually accept and think about what that should look like. Basically, every year after 72, you're asked to go to the DMV and you need to retry. And that's the thing, is that there are, complicated questions here also in terms of public safety and like your impact on others. Now, I generally err on the side of democracy, but if we're going to have age limits, like you said, for, 25, I think, for the House?
Yeah,
30
what
for,
is it?
30 for the Senate, 35
president?
for president. Which I think is actually too low. But
you think that's too low?
Sorry, no.
Too
it's
high.
way too high.
Yeah,
I don't think it should be. I don't really think there should be anything there at all.
I
But
agree.
my point is that if we're gonna have that, then I don't think it's really fair at all that we don't have old ones.
I don't think we should have any of them. I also agree with Cenk that naturalized citizens should have the right to run for president of the United States. And Cenk's argument on it is, does have some legal basis, but putting aside the legal argument, because there was a court ruling that basically said naturalized citizens should have all the rights of natural-born citizens, and to not do so is discriminatory. So, using that basis, you can then say, this interpretation is illegal or unconstitutional. But putting aside the legal questions, which I'm admittedly no expert on whatsoever, I think just as a matter of principle, I do think that they should be able to run for office. I think Cenk should be able to run for president if he wants. So again, this is all just to say, I am reluctant to put limits on who people can vote for, and limiting their democratic choices, I think, is a big problem. Is part of why I have an issue with the two-party system and the fact that our choices are so constrained. It's why I have an issue with money in politics, the way that constrains choices, et cetera. But in this instance, I do think that the state really does have an interest in keeping people from high office who actively subvert the basic principles of the country, which is why I support this. But obviously.
See, we're not even in disagreement. We're only in disagreement on the standard and through which the mechanism is something that should be on.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.